So, good afternoon, everyone. Please come in, take your seats, take out a piece of paper and a pencil. Actually, take out your notebooks. I'm going to hand you the piece of paper. We're going to go over today the lunar phases, okay, the lunar cycle. And so we're going to start with a little pre-test, and I've written for you here so you can see better, but I also have it pulled up on the screen. I'm going to hand you these pieces of paper, and we're going to go over together how I would like you to set them up, because we're going to be doing a pre and post test. Keep these handy and keep them nearby, because at the end of class you're going to be doing the post test, and then you're going to be handing it back to me. That's going to be your exit ticket. Okay, so before we begin, everybody start with writing your name, your period, and the date in the top right corner, and in the top left corner you're going to write pre. Okay, then number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On the back, we're going to do the same thing. On the top left, you're going to write post. That's for the end of class. You're going to do the same thing, write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Give you a minute to write that down. And I'd like to go over the questions with you and read them aloud together as a class so we can be kind of on the same page, but then I'll give you about 2 minutes afterwards to finish up on your own. Don't be afraid if you don't know the question or you just have no idea. It's okay to leave it blank. This is just for me to see where you guys are at with this specifically, okay? So our first question is going to be, how many phases are there in the lunar cycle, okay? How many phases? Number 2, how many high and low tides normally occur during the day, during one day? Number 3, how long is the lunar cycle? How long does it take for a lunar cycle to start and completely finish? Number 4, what term refers to when the moon is growing in size? And number 5, what term refers to when the moon is shrinking in size? Now, I don't actually mean the moon is growing or the moon is shrinking. I mean when we're here looking up at the sky and we look at it on Monday and then we look at it on Friday and it looks like it's gotten smaller, that's what I mean by shrinking. Just like I mean by growing, okay? That's the illumination that's hitting the moon, what we can see. So take 2 minutes to go ahead and write your answers, and then we'll go over something before we get started. I'll get the PowerPoint set up in the meantime. Excuse me. All right, guys, so I think that's enough time. Let's go ahead and go over a couple of these, just a couple easy ones, because as we go through the lesson, these questions are going to be answered, okay? And I just want you to keep them in mind. But a couple of the easy ones we can probably knock out that a lot of you may know already is, so how long is the lunar cycle? Any guesses? Okay, 30 days. Okay, so a month. Close. Actually, it is 29.5 days. That's the exact amount, but that's the right thinking that you should be thinking about. It's a month. So another one that you guys may know, that easy to knock out. How many phases are there in the lunar cycle? Okay? Any guesses? Okay, the answer to that one is there are 8 phases in the lunar cycle. Okay? So the rest of these we're going to go over a lot more in detail as we go through the PowerPoint, so just take your time. And now I'd like you to really take out your notebooks, because we're going to start taking notes as we go along in the PowerPoint. And I also encourage you guys to not only write your notes, but draw, okay? The lunar phases are all about remembering what you're seeing, okay? So let's start by thinking about this for a second. So what causes the moon to look like it changes day to day, right? So why is it that, one day the moon looks super tiny, then a couple days, you forget about it, Then all of a sudden, it's half full. Oh, wow, right? So what causes that? Let's think about that for a second. So we know that the sun, the earth, and the moon all have to do with why we have the lunar cycle and the lunar phases, right? So the earth rotates around the sun, revolves around the sun, and then the moon revolves around the earth, okay? The sun is what gives off the light that then reflects off the moon so that we here on earth are able to observe the changes. And the changes has to do with the position, okay, of all three of those celestial bodies, all right? So let's go ahead and get started on the moon phases PowerPoint. So let's just quickly go over the standards and objectives, okay? Explain the impacts of objects in space on each other, including the sun on the earth, including seasons and gravitational attraction. 2, the moon on the earth, including phases, tides, and eclipses, and the relative position of each body. So that's what we just talked about a second ago, or how these relative positions of these celestial bodies are what give us the lunar phases, but also other things like tides and eclipses. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about lunar eclipses or solar eclipses, right? So by the end of this, we're going to be able to identify the phases of the lunar cycle. That is super important, okay? The phases of the lunar cycle. There's 8 to remember. We're going to have those down packed. Describe the effect of the moon's phases on the Earth's seas, okay? And that refers to what we just talked about, the tides, okay? Explain the difference between a lunar and solar eclipse, okay? And that we're going to get into in the PowerPoint as well. So some prior knowledge, the movement / rotations of the Earth, Moon, and Sun are connected by gravitational pull. So we all know that gravitational pull is what keeps all of the celestial bodies perpetually revolving around each other, right? And that is what connects everything. So let's keep that in mind. The Earth, Moon, and the Sun are the most important things when talking about the lunar phases and the lunar cycle. The Earth revolves around the Sun in a year, which is 365 days. We know that. The time it takes the Earth to revolve once, make one whole revolution around the Sun, is 365 days. And the Earth also rotates on its axis in a 24-hour period, which is one day, right? So not only is the Earth moving around the Sun in 365 days, but every day on its own axis, the Earth rotates every 24 hours fully. There are changes in the observable shape of the moon over the course of about a month, so 29.5 days. So whoever said earlier that it was a month, that was right on the money. The exact amount is 29.5 days, but it's good that you guys are thinking about the month being the full lunar cycle. So these are some vocabulary terms that I want to go over with you guys, but I also want to have you guys write down. So please copy these terms in your notebooks as I go through them and expand on them a little bit. So lunar, when we refer to lunar, that just means the moon. Lunar phases, any of the varying appearances of the moon as seen from the Earth, as different amounts of the moon are illuminated by the sun. So that's the first thing that I want to bring up. The moon doesn't make its own light. It's not like the sun. It doesn't have a source of energy or heat or anything like that. The moon simply reflects light that comes from the sun, and based on its position of all three celestial bodies is where we from Earth are able to see the changes in those positions and see the different shapes and sizes of the moon. Tides. Tides are the alternate rising and falling of the sea, usually twice in each lunar day at a particular place due to the attraction of the moon and the sun. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little more further on. With tides is exactly that, just the falling and the rising of the sea. And that has to do, again, with the position of the moon in relation to the position of the earth and also the sun. So then eclipse, the total or partial obscuring, getting in the way, of one celestial body by another, okay? So I'll give you guys about 2 minutes to write that down. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. So again, please take notes during the lecture and the slides. Okay, I'm gonna give you guys a lot of information, so if you don't catch it on the first go around, don't worry, because I have another video that I'm gonna show you that's gonna really tie everything in together. All right, and again, make sure to draw stuff. That's gonna help you remember these things a lot better. So here we have the phases of the moon, right? And so this is what I was talking about. This diagram makes it really easy to look at how the position of the sun in relation to the moon and the earth are what gives us our lunar phases, okay, which make up the lunar cycle. So we start with the new moon, okay? The new moon is when the sun's rays are coming directly and hitting the moon, but from Earth, we only see the dark side of the moon. So that's the new moon. That's when you look up in the sky and either you might see a vague outline of the moon because that might just be the intense light behind it, or you might not see anything at all, and that's when the new moon happens. Then we're going to go on to a waxing crescent moon. So let's refer back to the pretest real quick. The question that I was talking about, what term refers to when the moon is growing in size? So we refer to the moon growing in size as waxing. So during this cycle, I want you to think of whenever the moon is growing or more is being illuminated, more of the moon is being illuminated and can be seen by the earth, think of that as waxing, okay? That happens at about a 45-degree angle to the earth. So if I'm standing on earth and I'm observing, the light hitting the moon is going to cause me to see that first lunar phase, waxing crescent moon. It's a very slither, it's when you see it's just starting out, okay? And then a couple more days pass by. Then we're gonna get to the first quarter moon. This happens when the moon is in a right angle orientation with Earth and the sun. And so in this instance, the sun's rays are hitting the right side of the moon in this case, and we are only able to see about half the moon illuminated, right, from our point of view. Remember, we're still waxing, okay? So the next phase in this part of the lunar cycle is a waxing gibbous moon, right? So this is the part where the moon is almost at a full moon. You can almost see the whole thing. It's just about there, but it's not quite. That little slither, instead of it being like over here, like in the waxing crescent moon, where we could only see the slither illuminated, now we see the majority of the moon illuminated with only a little slither not illuminated, right? And that's because the sun's rays are hitting it and we're able to see a lot more from the earth. Our next part of the lunar cycle is the full moon, and that's what everybody looks at or draws when they think of the moon, is the full moon. So when you're standing from Earth, you look up and it's just the entirety of the moon, that from the half that we can see, reflecting light off so that we can see it, okay? So then that first half of the lunar cycle is where the moon is waxing, okay, growing. After the full moon, then we're on the decline. We are now shrinking. This is called waning. Remember the question, what term refers to when the moon is shrinking in size? So now we go from full moon to waning gibbous moon. And so now it's the opposite of the waxing gibbous moon, because instead of getting bigger, it's getting smaller. It's heading to the new moon, which is getting smaller. So now we had that slither of no illumination. We can still see the majority of the moon, but it is getting smaller. As more days pass, then we're going to hit the last quarter or third quarter moon. That is when we're only seeing half of the moon again, and again it's waning, it's shrinking in size, so it's getting smaller. Then we're going to move on to the waning crescent moon. Okay, so that's just that little slithers left of illumination, and it's, you know, getting smaller, shrinking, and then from there we go back to new moon, so where we don't see it or barely see it at all. And so that is one full lunar cycle, which again occurs in about 29.5 days. Fun little fact for you guys, a little tidbit, is that the moon actually makes the full rotation around the Earth in about 27.3 days, but due to Earth's rotation along with the moon, the way we see the lunar phases actually occurs in about 29.5 days. So just something to keep in mind there. So let's go on. Let's talk a little bit about tides, okay? Let's think about real quick that question I asked, how many high and low tides normally occur during one day, right? So let's read this and then